The Sterling Tower lobby had been transformed into something Catherine Vale barely recognized. White lights cascading down marble pillars like frozen waterfalls, the scent of pine and cinnamon thick enough to taste. She stood on the mezzanine level, ice blue eyes scanning the crowd below, with the practiced detachment of someone who'd learned to measure every person, every angle, every potential weakness. At 34, she'd built an empire from her father's crumbling legacy, turned Sterling Capital Group into a juggernaut that owned 40% of Chicago's waterfront. The crimson dress she wore, a bold V-neck that demanded attention without apology, made her impossible to miss. Most found her intimidating. Some called her ruthless. No one called her soft. Rebecca Foster appeared at her elbow, tablet glowing. The numbers look good for Q4. The Riverside acquisition closed this morning. Board's pleased. Catherine barely glanced at the screen. They should be. We came in under budget and ahead of schedule. Rebecca hesitated, venturing into territory she knew was dangerous. Boss, you've been working 18-hour days for 3 months. When was the last time you actually... I don't pay you to manage my personal life. I pay you to manage my schedule. The younger woman retreated with practiced grace, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and the champagne she hadn't touched. Below, her employees laughed and drank and pretended they weren't terrified of her. Good. Fear kept people sharp, kept them from getting comfortable enough to make mistakes. She'd learned that from Richard Vale, the man who taught her that power meant never apologizing, never showing weakness, never letting anyone close enough to hurt you. 16 years ago, when she was 18 and still believed in fairy tales, she'd fallen in love with a boy named Daniel Cross. He was a piano prodigy, all wild, dark hair and passionate eyes, the kind of talent that made you forget to breathe when he played. That summer at the music camp in Pennsylvania, he'd written her a song. Starlight Vow, he called it, and played it for her one night under a sky so full of stars, it felt like they could reach up and touch forever. 3 weeks later, Daniel died on a rain-slicked highway outside Pittsburgh. The song died with him, or so she believed. She'd forbidden herself from listening to music the way she once had, treating it instead as background noise, afraid that if she let herself feel too deeply, the grief would swallow her whole. Movement near the dessert table caught her attention. A little girl in a rumpled dress, maybe 7 years old, reaching on tiptoes for a chocolate-covered strawberry. Dark curls bouncing, brown eyes wide with the kind of wonder Catherine had forgotten existed. The child stretched higher, foot slipping on something wet, champagne probably, spilled by some careless guest. She went down hard, the sound of her knee cracking against marble, sharp enough to cut through conversation. The man was beside her in seconds. Catherine watched him drop to his knees, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket with the automatic grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Gray work shirt faded from too many washes, fabric worn thin at the elbows, calloused hands, still bearing traces of grease from whatever he'd been fixing earlier. At 36, he carried himself with quiet dignity that most people overlooked. They saw the janitor. They didn't see the way he cradled his daughter's head, voice low and soothing, like he could calm storms. "Hey, sweetheart, Daddy's got you. You're okay. Just a little scrape. We'll fix it." The girl's sobs quieted to hiccups, small hands clutching his shirt. Catherine felt something crack in her chest, something she'd kept frozen for so long she'd forgotten it could thaw. The way this man held his child reminded her of someone, though she couldn't name who. Someone who'd looked at her like she was worth protecting from every hurt the universe could devise. "Can you control your child?" Preston Ashford strode over, navy suit immaculate, jaw tight with the irritation of someone unused to being inconvenienced. Catherine's fiancé, or rather, the man her father had chosen for her to marry in 6 weeks, was handsome in a catalog model way, with perfectly styled chestnut hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked in private equity and spoke frequently about optimizing assets and maximizing shareholder value in a tone that made it clear he viewed most things, including people, as items on a spreadsheet. This is a corporate event, not a daycare. If you can't afford a babysitter, maybe you shouldn't have brought her. The janitor's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. She's 7. She slipped. It was an accident. An accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place. Preston's eyes raked over the man's work clothes with undisguised contempt. Your maintenance. There's a staff entrance for a reason. The little girl's bottom lip trembled, and Catherine saw something in the man's shoulders. A barely restrained fury that spoke of dignity pushed too far. He opened his mouth to respond, but Catherine was already moving, descending the mezzanine stairs with deliberate grace, each step measured and purposeful. When she reached them, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Preston with a coldness that could frost windows. You don't have the authority to speak to my employees that way. Apologize. Now. The room went silent, everyone watching. Preston's face flushed red, lips pressing into a thin line, but he managed a clipped sorry, directed more at the floor than at the man or child. Catherine turned to the janitor then, and for just a moment, her expression softened. She saw the way he held his daughter, the care in his touch, the protective fury barely restrained. She saw something that felt dangerously close to recognition, though she couldn't name why. In my building, we don't measure people's worth by their job title. We measure them by their character. And right now, yours is seriously lacking. She looked back at the man. Take care of your daughter. First aid kit is in the executive lounge, 5th floor. Take the private elevator. He nodded, throat too tight for words, and carried the girl away. Preston stood there for a moment, jaw working, before stalking off toward the bar. Catherine returned to the mezzanine, but the feeling lingered like perfume in an empty room. Something about the scene unsettled her. Not the confrontation with Preston, which was routine, but the way the janitor had held his daughter. Gentle but unbreakable. The kind of love that would burn down the world to keep a child safe. An hour later, when the man and his daughter returned, the girl's knee properly bandaged, spirits restored by hot chocolate and cookies Rebecca had provided, the party had grown louder. Someone had opened the piano, a vintage Steinway that usually sat covered and silent, more decorative than functional. A few employees gathered around it, laughing as a tipsy accountant played 3 chords with more enthusiasm than skill. The little girl tugged her father toward the instrument. Daddy, can you play? Please, just one song so I can sleep. Catherine watched from above as the man hesitated, fingers twitching at his sides. She saw fear cross his face, the kind of fear that came from having something precious and being terrified of showing it to a world that might judge. But the child's eyes were so hopeful, bottom lip trembling slightly, and after a long moment, he sat down at the bench. The crowd quieted, curiosity replacing their chatter. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. The scars across his right palm caught the light, spiderweb patterns where surgical steel had tried and failed to completely restore what had been destroyed. Catherine found herself leaning forward, gripping the brass railing, unable to look away. He began to play. The melody that filled the hall was unlike anything most of them had ever heard. It started gentle, like rain on glass, each note placed with such precision and care that it felt less like music and more like a conversation whispered in the dark. Then it grew, swelling into something achingly beautiful, a cascade of sound that spoke of longing and loss, and a love so deep it had no words. His damaged hand moved with grace that defied its injury, compensating when it struggled, turning limitations into interpretation. Catherine's hand tightened on the railing until her knuckles turned white. The melody wrapped around her like a ghost, pulling her back through 16 years to a summer night when stars seemed close enough to touch. She was 18 again, sitting on that dock at the Pennsylvania camp, Daniel beside her with his wild confidence and electric smile, his fingers dancing over portable keyboard keys. I'm calling it Starlight Vow. It holds everything I feel but can't say, everything I want to give you but don't have words for. She'd cried then, happy tears, and kissed him under those impossible stars. 3 weeks later, police officers stood on her parents' doorstep. "Miss Vale, there's been an accident. Daniel Cross was pronounced dead at the scene. We're so sorry for your loss." The song had become her lifeline in the years that followed, the last piece of Daniel she had left. She'd forbidden herself from seeking out recordings. There were none anyway, as far as she knew. But she played it in her head during board meetings when her father demanded she be ruthless, hummed it under her breath in empty apartments when the loneliness threatened to consume her. It reminded her that once, briefly, she'd been loved for who she was rather than what she could provide. But now someone else was playing it, every note, every pause, every aching phrase exactly as Daniel had played it that night. Catherine's vision blurred, chest constricting until each breath felt like labor. The guests around her murmured appreciation, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her feet had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The man finished and opened his eyes to find the CEO standing 3 feet away, face pale, blue eyes swimming with unshed tears that threatened to spill. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. The man stood slowly, heart hammering against his ribs. "It's just an old melody, something I picked up years ago." "Don't lie to me." Catherine's voice sharpened, desperation creeping into her tone like poison. "That song was written for me by someone who died 16 years ago. No one else knew it. No one could have known it." She stepped closer, searching his face for answers he clearly wasn't ready to give. "Who are you?" The little girl appeared at his side, sleepy and smiling. "That was beautiful, Daddy. Can we go home now?" Catherine's gaze dropped to the child, then back to the man. She saw fear in his eyes, the way he instinctively moved to shield his daughter from her intensity. She forced herself to breathe, to step back, to remember where she was and who was watching. But as he gathered the girl's coat and hurried toward the exit, Catherine stood rooted to the spot. The melody still echoed in her skull, like a hymn or a curse. She stared at his scarred hands, at the sorrow etched into the lines around his eyes, at the way he held his daughter like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Who was he? And how had he stolen a piece of her past? Sleep refused to come. Catherine stood at her penthouse window at 2 in the morning, watching snow begin to fall over Chicago, each flake catching city lights on its descent. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, but also those scarred hands moving across piano keys with impossible grace. The melody looped endlessly in her mind, beautiful and haunting and wrong, because it shouldn't exist anywhere except in her memories. By 5 a.m., she was at her desk, pulling up the employee file. Ethan Cross, hired 3 years ago as maintenance staff, no college degree listed. Previous employment at a warehouse, a grocery store, odd jobs scattered across the Midwest. Emergency contact. Lily Cross, age 7, daughter. No mention of music, nothing about talent, nothing that explained how a man working night shifts, fixing toilets and changing light bulbs, could play like his soul depended on it. A note from his hiring interview caught her attention. Employee requested health insurance package specifically covering cancer treatment and experimental procedures. When asked why, stated, "I lost my wife. I won't lose my daughter." Catherine's throat tightened. This wasn't a con artist. This was a man trying to survive, doing whatever it took to protect the only family he had left. But that didn't answer the questions burning through her brain. How did he know the song? Where had he learned it? Was there a recording she didn't know about? Had Daniel taught it to someone before he died? She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a decade. Dr. Lawrence Kent had been Daniel's mentor at the conservatory, the professor who'd recognized genius in a 17-year-old with more passion than discipline. The line rang 4 times before his familiar voice answered, rough with age and sleep. "Catherine, is that really you? I need to see you. Today. It's about Daniel." There was a long pause on the other end. "I'll come to your office. Give me 4 hours." He arrived that afternoon, A lean man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes obscured by wire-rimmed glasses. Catherine hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, couldn't bear to be around anyone who reminded her of what she'd lost. But when she called, he came without question. She played him a recording someone had filmed on their phone the night before, posted to a private group for Sterling Capital employees. The video quality was poor, the audio tinny, but the melody came through clear enough. Dr. Kent listened in silence, expression unreadable. When the video ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger. "That's remarkable." Catherine leaned forward. "Is it Starlight Val? Daniel's song?" The professor set his glasses on her desk with careful precision. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 16 years ago, but I didn't because I thought it would hurt you more than help." The words landed like a physical blow. Daniel didn't finish that song. Catherine felt the room tilt beneath her. "What?" "He wrote the opening. Brilliant 8 bars, absolutely brilliant. But he got stuck. Couldn't figure out where to take it. I watched him torture himself over it for 2 weeks, scrapping versions, starting over, never satisfied." Kent paused, choosing his words carefully. "There was another student at camp that summer. Quiet kid, talented but overlooked. From a poor family, I think. Daniel asked him for help." Catherine's hands gripped the edge of her desk. "And?" "The other student took Daniel's opening and completed it. Turned those 8 bars into something extraordinary. But then Daniel died, and the song became his legacy. I never corrected the record because..." He trailed off, looking older than his years. "Because I thought it would dishonor Daniel's memory. He was my star pupil. Admitting he hadn't finished his masterpiece felt like diminishing him somehow." "Who was the other student?" "I don't remember his name. It's been so long, and I taught hundreds of kids over those years. He didn't fight for credit. When Daniel died, he just disappeared. Didn't return to camp the following summer. I assumed he'd given up music entirely." Catherine pulled up the frozen frame of the video on her laptop screen. Ethan's face, illuminated by the piano's reading light, eyes closed in something that looked like prayer or penance. "Could this be him?" Kent stared at the image, brow furrowed. "I don't know. Maybe. The face doesn't trigger any memories, but 16 years changes people. There's only one way to find out." He closed the laptop gently. "Ask him." Catherine tried. She called down to the maintenance department as soon as Kent left. "Is Ethan Cross working tonight?" The supervisor sounded confused. "No, ma'am. He called in sick this morning. First time in 3 years." "What about tomorrow?" "He requested personal days through the end of the week." Something cold settled in Catherine's stomach. "I need his address." She sent Wade Garrett, her head of security, a former Marine with observant eyes and discretion she trusted, to check on the situation. Wade returned an hour later with news that made her blood run cold. "Boss, I went to the address on file. Apartment building on the east side, pretty rough neighborhood. The landlord says Cross and his daughter moved out 3 days ago." 3 days ago? That was before the party, before she'd confronted him. He'd already been planning to disappear. Paid rent through the end of the month, but left no forwarding address. Wouldn't say where they were going. Did anyone see them leave? Neighbor across the hall said they left early morning with just a couple suitcases. The little girl was crying. Cross told her they were going on an adventure, but the neighbors said he looked scared. Catherine felt panic clawed her chest. She'd driven him away. Her questions, her intensity, her desperate need for answers had frightened him off. But why? What was he hiding? Or more accurately, what was he protecting? She hired a private investigator who found nothing. 2 weeks passed with no trace, no credit card charges, no cell phone pings, no sign of Ethan or Lily anywhere in Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin. The man had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed at all. The absence gnawed at her, not just because of the unanswered questions about the song, though those haunted her dreams. It was the way he'd looked at her that night, with recognition that went deeper than strangers meeting by chance. He'd known her, really known her, in a way that most people never could, and then he'd run. Meanwhile, the rest of her carefully constructed life began to fracture. Preston grew increasingly insistent about wedding plans, showing up at her office with seating charts and menu tastings she had no interest in. "Catherine, we need to finalize numbers. The venue needs confirmation." "My mother's been calling Rebecca because you won't return her calls. Do you love me, Preston?" The question caught him off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Do you love me? Really love me? His jaw worked silently for a long moment. "I care about you. I respect you. I think we make a good partnership. That's more than most marriages have. But you don't love me. Love is for children and poets. We're adults building empires. What we have is better than love. It's strategic, sustainable, mutually beneficial." Catherine thought about Ethan's scarred hands on piano keys, playing a song he'd written as a boy for a girl he'd never even spoken to. About the way he held Lily like she was the entire world. About wives who died fighting cancer while their husbands worked 3 jobs to afford treatments that didn't work. You're right. Love is for children and poets, and apparently for janitors who give away their hearts without expecting anything in return. But not for people like us. Preston's expression shifted to calculation. This is about him, isn't it? The maintenance worker who played piano at the Christmas party. I've seen the footage. I've had people look into it. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and handed it to her. Wire transfers from Sterling Capital accounts to Ashford Investment Partners, dates and amounts that didn't match any merger documents she'd signed. What is this? Insurance. In case you get any ideas about calling off the wedding, those transfers could look like embezzlement if someone wanted to spin them that way. Or they could look like standard merger preparation. Depends on who's controlling the narrative. This is blackmail. This is business. The wedding happens in 2 weeks. The merger closes. We all walk away winners. Or things get messy and everyone loses. Your choice. After he left, Catherine sat in frozen silence. Then she called Rebecca. "I need you to pull every financial document related to the Ashford Investment Partners merger. Every wire transfer, every approval, every email. And I need you to do it quietly. Don't tell anyone what you're looking for." Rebecca's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. How far back? 18 months since negotiations started. The assistant left without questions, returning 3 hours later with a flash drive and a grim expression. "Boss, you need to see this." They spread the documents across Catherine's conference table, and what Rebecca had found went far beyond simple irregularities. Preston had been systematically siphoning funds from his own firm for over a year, covering the theft with false projections and inflated asset valuations. The merger wasn't about creating a powerhouse. It was about giving Preston access to Sterling Capital's accounts to hide the $42 million he'd stolen from his investors. The wedding wasn't a partnership. It was a bailout. How did I not see this? He's good at hiding things. Rebecca pointed to shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, consulting fees that didn't correspond to any actual services. He's been planning this for at least 2 years, waiting for the right opportunity. "The right person, you mean?" Rebecca nodded. "He chose you because he knew your father would push for the merger, knew you'd be so focused on business terms that you wouldn't look at his books closely enough." Catherine felt sick. "What are you going to do?" She looked at the evidence of Preston's fraud, at the carefully constructed scheme that would have destroyed Sterling Capital's reputation and her own career. She thought about how close she'd come to walking into his trap, all because she'd been too frozen to feel anything strongly enough to question it. "I'm going to end this tonight." Her phone rang at 6 in the morning. Preston, his voice tight with false concern. "Catherine, we need to talk about wedding plans and about why you've been distracted lately. My people saw you with that janitor." Her stomach dropped. "You're having me followed?" I'm protecting our investment. The wedding's in 6 weeks. The merger needs you focused. Don't let some distraction ruin what we've built." Catherine hung up without responding. She stared out at the city as dawn broke over Lake Michigan, snow still falling in thick curtains that made everything look clean and new. She'd spent 16 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that power and control were enough, that love was weakness, that feeling too deeply would destroy her. But standing there, thinking about a man with scarred hands who'd written her a love song from the shadows and asked for nothing in return, a man who'd sacrificed his dreams to save a stranger and raised his daughter alone and worked night shifts just to afford insurance, she realized something fundamental had shifted. In business, I learned that you control what you don't let your heart touch. But maybe that's why I've never really lived. She picked up her phone and made 2 calls. The first was to her father in Palm Springs. "Richard, it's Catherine. We need to talk about Preston. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., your old office. Don't be late." His cold anger carried clearly through the line. "This better be good." "It's not. That's why we need to talk." The second call went to a number she dialed obsessively for 2 weeks, always getting voicemail, never leaving a message. This time, miraculously, he answered. 2 weeks after the Christmas party, on a night when snow fell thick and heavy over Chicago, Catherine was preparing to leave her office when she heard it again. Piano music drifting up from the lobby, faint and haunting and unmistakable. She didn't call for the elevator. She ran down the stairs instead, heels clicking on marble, breath coming too fast, afraid that if she moved too slowly, he would vanish like smoke. The lobby stretched empty except for a single figure seated at the Steinway. Ethan's back faced her, shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He played Starlight Vow again, but this time it sounded different, sadder, more resigned, like a man saying goodbye to something he'd loved too long from too far away. "You came back." Her voice echoed in the cavernous space. His hands stilled on the keys, but he didn't turn around. "I shouldn't have run." The words came out quiet, almost too soft to hear. "Lily asked me why we left. I couldn't give her a good answer. She liked it here. Liked the cookies Rebecca gave her. Liked watching the lights. Liked the nice lady CEO who let us use the fancy elevator." He finally turned, and Catherine saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the kind that came from running when you had nowhere to go. "I owed you the truth, even if you hate me for it. I could never hate you for playing beautifully, but I need to understand." She moved closer, footsteps careful on the marble. "That song, Starlight Vow, Daniel Cross was supposed to have written it for me before he died. But Dr. Kent told me Daniel didn't finish it. Someone else did." She stopped directly behind him. "Was it you?" Ethan stood slowly, movements deliberate. Up close, Catherine could see the silver threaded through his light brown hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But his eyes, gray-green and achingly honest, held hers without flinching. "Yes, it was me." Catherine's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself, her carefully maintained control finally crumbling into something raw and unprotected. "Why? Why would you do that? Why would you let him take credit?" "Because he loved you, and I was nobody." Ethan stepped back from the piano, creating distance. "Just some scholarship kid who played because he had to. I was at that camp on a scholarship I could barely afford. Worked nights washing dishes to pay for bus fare to Pennsylvania and back. I played piano because it was the only time I felt like I mattered." He turned toward the windows, unable to meet her eyes. "And then I saw you. You probably don't remember. Why would you? I was invisible. But I watched you laugh with Daniel, watched the way your eyes lit up when he played. And I thought, that's what love looks like. That's what it means to matter to someone. I wanted to give you something, even if you never knew it came from me." The confession hung between them like a physical thing, heavy with 16 years of silence. Catherine found her voice, though it emerged hoarse. So you wrote a love song for another man to give to me. I wrote a love song for you. Ethan turned back, and the raw honesty in his face made her chest ache. Daniel just delivered it. He knew I had feelings I couldn't express. He wasn't cruel about it. He offered to tell you the truth, but I said no. I told him you were meant for someone like him, brilliant and confident and whole, not someone like me. His voice dropped to something barely audible. When he played it for you that night, I was back in Pittsburgh washing dishes. But I knew, somewhere, you were hearing notes I'd written, feeling something I'd poured into music because I didn't have any other way to reach you. And that was enough. It had to be. Catherine's tears came then, hot and unchecked. The man she'd mourned for 16 years hadn't written the song that saved her. A stranger had, a boy who loved her from the shadows and gave away his heart without ever expecting anything in return. What happened to you? The question came out desperate. Dr. Kent said you were talented. Why are you fixing pipes instead of playing concert halls? Ethan held up his right hand, turning it so she could see the scars that webbed across his palm and up his wrist. The damaged tissue caught the light, creating shadows in the valleys where surgical steel had tried and failed to completely restore what had been destroyed. 3 years after that summer, I signed a contract with Atlas Performance Group. Catherine felt ice crawl up her spine. Atlas Performance had been a subsidiary of her father's company. Regional concert series, 20 cities across the Midwest. My name on posters for the first time in my life. Opening night, Cleveland. I got there early for rehearsal. Stage crew was setting up rigging for lights. I heard this crack, metal fatigue. The whole truss started to fall. His eyes went distant, seeing something Catherine couldn't. There was a cellist right under it. Young woman, maybe 19, from Boston Conservatory. She didn't see it coming. I shoved her out of the way, got my hand caught in the rigging when it came down. 1/2 ton of equipment. His voice went flat, emotionless, the way trauma victims spoke when the pain was too large to process. They said later the bones were pulverized. 3 surgeries couldn't fix it completely. Catherine moved closer, her hand reaching for his damaged one. She lifted it gently, traced the spiderweb patterns with her fingertips. Tell me about the moment you decided to push her out of the way. Ethan's breath caught. There was no decision, just reaction. The truss was falling. She was there. My body moved before my brain could stop it. I didn't think about my career or my hands or anything except getting her out of the way. You gave up everything to save a stranger. I gave up a career. She kept her life. His voice was steady, certain. That's not a trait I regret. Some things matter more than dreams. I learned that watching my father die under a car because someone didn't maintain a jack properly. I learned it watching my mother work herself sick, cleaning other people's houses. And I learned it again when that cellist walked away without a scratch, while paramedics tried to save my hand. Would you do it again, knowing what it cost you? Every single time. The answer came without hesitation, and Catherine felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This was the difference between Ethan and her father, between someone who measured worth in quarterly profits and someone who measured it in lives protected, in doing what was right even when it destroyed you. Kent said I could have had a real career, solid, respectable, enough to support a family and do what I loved. Catherine felt bile rise in her throat. And my father gave you $75,000. So I learned to fix the things that break. Ethan's smile held no warmth, but also no bitterness. Just acceptance of a reality he'd long since made peace with. After the accident, no one would hire me for music. I was damaged goods. I learned plumbing, electrical, HVAC repair at a technical school in Detroit. Took whatever jobs I could find. Then Natalie got sick. My wife, Lily's mother. She was a nurse at Northwestern Memorial. We met in Detroit and she knew my story, married me anyway. Said she loved the man I was, not the man I could have been. His voice cracked. When the cancer came, I worked 3 jobs for 2 years while she went through treatments insurance barely covered. She died anyway. In our apartment, in our bed, with Lily asleep beside her because our daughter wouldn't leave her mother's side. Natalie made me promise to keep music in Lily's life, to not let my bitterness poison what she could love. So when I saw the job posting for Sterling Capital, maintenance technician, good pay, excellent benefits, insurance that actually covered things, I applied. I didn't make the connection to Atlas Performance at first. Different subsidiary, different paperwork. But then I got here and saw your name on the directory. Catherine Vale. Why did you stay? Because I'm a coward. Because seeing you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. Ethan's honesty was brutal, self-lacerating. And because I needed the job. Because Lily needed stability and healthcare and a father who could provide even if he couldn't give her the childhood she deserved. Catherine moved without thinking, closing the distance between them, her arms wrapped around him, and after a moment of surprise, his came around her. They stood like that in the empty lobby, 2 broken people holding each other while snow fell outside and the weight of 16 years finally found somewhere to rest. You're not responsible for your father's sins. Ethan's voice was muffled against her hair. Aren't I? Catherine pulled back enough to look at him. I took over his company, expanded it, made it more profitable, all while benefiting from the money he made destroying lives. I never looked, never asked about the people buried in the foundation of everything I built. Her voice turned sharp with self-recrimination. But you know what the cruelest part is? I told myself I was different from him, that I ran things better, more ethically, that power and control were enough to fill the holes he left in me. I was lying to myself for so long, I forgot what truth even felt like. We cannot choose the sins our parents committed, but we choose how we live with them. I chose blindness for too long. Whatever your father did, you are not him. The way you handled Lily at the party, the way you stood up to Preston, the way you're standing here now letting your heart break over something you didn't cause, that's not him. That's you. The kindness in his words undid her. Catherine's carefully maintained composure finally shattered, and she sank onto the piano bench, shoulders shaking with sobs she'd held back for 2 weeks, for 16 years, if she was honest. All the grief and guilt and loneliness she'd armored herself against came pouring out in waves. Ethan sat beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't offer platitudes, just sat there in solidarity while she fell apart in a way she hadn't allowed herself since Daniel died. When the worst of it passed, Catherine wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I need to deal with Preston, with my father, with everything I've been avoiding. She stood, squaring her shoulders. Tomorrow morning I'm meeting with Richard. Then I'm ending the engagement and exposing Preston's fraud. It's going to get ugly, uglier than anything I've faced before. Do you want me there? No, this is something I have to do alone. She turned to face him fully. But when it's over, whatever happens, I need you to know that choosing truth isn't about you. It's about me. About finally becoming the person I should have been instead of the one my father trained me to be. I know. His voice came out quiet but firm. And whatever happens, you're not alone. Lily and I will be here when you're done. Catherine, at 6:30 in the morning, her phone rang. Preston, his voice tight with false concern. Catherine, we need to finalize wedding details. My mother's been calling Rebecca, and I need to discuss why you've been distracted lately. My people tell me you've been spending time with that maintenance worker. Her stomach dropped. You're having me followed? I'm protecting our investment. The wedding's in 4 weeks. The merger needs you focused. Catherine hung up without responding and immediately called Rebecca. I need you to pull every financial document related to the Ashford Investment Partners merger. Every wire transfer, every approval, every email. And I need you to do it quietly. Rebecca didn't ask questions. She never did, which was why Catherine trusted her. How far back? 18 months. since negotiations started. Rebecca pulled up shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, consulting fees that corresponded to no actual services, wire transfers that disappeared into accounts held by entities that existed only on paper. He's been planning this for at least 2 years. Chose you because he knew your father would push for the merger, knew you'd focus on business terms, and wouldn't look too closely at his books. Catherine stared at the evidence, feeling sick. How much? $42 million. Maybe more. These are just the transactions I could verify. Rebecca hesitated, then continued. There's something else. Gambling debts in Las Vegas. $8 million across 3 casinos. That's what drove him to this. He was trying to cover losses that spiraled out of control. Catherine sat down heavily. Preston wasn't just a thief. He was desperate, addicted, and using their marriage as cover while he tried to save himself from the consequences of his own weakness. Why are you? Some you work for because they're worth fighting beside. You're the second kind. Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't have time to process. Thank you. For this. For everything. When this is over, we'll deal with whatever comes. Rebecca's voice was steady, practical. Right now, you need to decide what you're going to do with this information. Catherine looked at the evidence of Preston's fraud, at the carefully constructed scheme that would have destroyed Sterling Capital's reputation and her own career. She thought about her father teaching her that power meant never apologizing, never showing weakness, never letting emotions interfere with profit. She thought about Ethan choosing to save a stranger, even though it cost him everything. I'm going to see my father, then I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and I'm ending this, all of it, today. Richard Vale was waiting in his old office when Catherine arrived at 7:45. The space still smelled like his cologne, still carried the weight of his presence, even though he'd officially retired 2 years ago. He looked older in the morning light, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. This had better be important enough to justify dragging me back from Palm Springs. It's not important in any way you'll appreciate, but it's necessary. Catherine didn't sit, didn't soften her stance. Preston Ashford has been embezzling from his firm for 18 months. $42 million stolen, hidden through shell companies and false projections. He's using our merger to gain access to Sterling Capital's accounts so he can cover the theft before his investors discover it. The wedding was never about partnership. It was about him needing a bailout. Richard's expression didn't change, but she saw the calculation behind his eyes. These are serious allegations. What proof do you have? Forensic documentation, bank records, email communications. Everything the SEC will need when I file the report this afternoon. You'll do no such thing. Her father stood, commanding the space through sheer force of presence. The Ashford merger is worth $200 million. It positions us for expansion into secondary markets we've been trying to crack for 5 years. You're willing to throw that away because of some financial irregularities that can be quietly resolved through settlement? They're not irregularities. He's a criminal. And you're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. Richard moved closer, and Catherine saw the contempt in his face. This is about that maintenance worker, isn't it? The one you've been sneaking around with? Preston showed me the security footage, late-night meetings, intimate conversations. You're blowing up your life because some janitor played you a pretty song. His name is Ethan Cross. And you're right, I care about him. But that's not why I'm ending the merger. Catherine's voice stayed level despite the fury building in her chest. I'm ending it because Preston is a thief who saw me as an escape route from prison. I'm ending it because I refuse to be complicit in fraud. And I'm ending it because for the first time in 16 years, I'm choosing integrity over convenience. Integrity doesn't build empires. Richard's voice turned cold. Sentimentality doesn't create wealth. You can have your moral clarity or you can have power, but you can't have both. I taught you that. No, you taught me that power required sacrificing everything good about being human. That success meant measuring people by their utility instead of their worth. That love was weakness and control was strength. Catherine felt the last thread of filial obligation snap cleanly. But Ethan Cross taught me something different. He taught me that real strength is choosing to do what's right, even when it destroys you. That character matters more than capability. That some things are worth protecting, even if it costs you everything. You're throwing away everything I built for a man who cleans toilets. I'm choosing to become someone worth being instead of someone worth fearing. She turned toward the door. And if that means I'm not your daughter anymore, then I've been an orphan for longer than I realized. If you do this, if you expose Preston and kill this merger, don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. Richard's final threat carried no power because Catherine had already walked away from everything it represented. She left him standing in his old office, frozen with impotent fury, and went to prepare for the board meeting that would determine her future. Rebecca was waiting in Catherine's office with fresh coffee and a determined expression. The board convenes at 2 o'clock. I've sent all members the preliminary documentation. They'll have 3 hours to review before you present. Catherine nodded, suddenly exhausted despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. What do you think they'll do? Honestly, it could go either way. Eleanor Whitmore will support you. She's been pushing for better governance for years. Donovan Burke is pragmatic enough to see that protecting the company from fraud is good business. But the old guard, Richard's people, they'll fight you. So I might lose everything today. You might, or you might prove that doing the right thing can actually work. Rebecca set down the coffee and met Catherine's eyes. Either way, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror tomorrow. That's worth something. Catherine spent the next hours preparing her presentation, organizing evidence into an irrefutable narrative. Preston's fraud, the shell companies, the gambling debts, the desperation that drove him to target Sterling Capital specifically. Every document, every transaction, every lie exposed and categorized. At 1:50, she stood outside the conference room, hand on the door, heart hammering against her ribs. Inside that room, 12 people would decide her fate. They could support her stand for integrity, or they could side with profit and expediency. She thought about Ethan's body moving before his brain could stop him, saving a stranger because it was right, even though it cost him everything. Sometimes courage wasn't about weighing options. Sometimes it was about pushing the door open and walking into the room because staying outside meant betraying everything you claimed to believe. Catherine pushed the door open and stepped into her future, whatever it might hold. The emergency board meeting convened at 2 o'clock sharp in the main conference room on Sterling Tower's 45th floor. 12 members filed in, 7 men, 5 women, ranging from 48 to 73, representing old money and new tech fortunes, and real estate dynasties, all united by the common goal of maximizing returns on their Sterling Capital investments. Eleanor Whitmore took her seat at the far end, the oldest member at 68, her Boston old money pedigree evident in the pearls at her throat and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Donovan Burke, the hedge fund manager at 52, settled beside her with his tablet already glowing. Richard Vail sat in the corner despite having no official authority anymore, his presence a violation of the retirement agreement, but one no one dared challenge. He'd built this company from nothing, and his force of personality still commanded rooms even without a title. Catherine stood at the head of the table, presentation remote, steady in her hand, despite the trembling she felt inside. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I'm calling this meeting to address critical information that's come to light regarding the Ashford Investment Partners merger and my engagement to Preston Ashford. She clicked through the evidence with methodical precision. Each financial statement, each wire transfer, each email chain, each shell company structure building an incontrovertible case. Preston Ashford has been embezzling from his firm for 18 months, $42 million stolen, covered by false projections and inflated asset valuations. He's using our merger as cover to hide the theft. The wedding was never about partnership. It was about him gaining access to our accounts before his fraud was discovered. The board members exchanged glances, some genuinely shocked, others already calculating angles in exposure. Eleanor leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the light. These are extremely serious allegations, Catherine. Have you verified this information through independent channels? Our forensic accountants spent the night confirming every transaction. We're prepared to file a complete report with the SEC and provide full cooperation with their investigation. Catherine gestured to the lawyers seated along the wall, witnesses to the process. But I wanted this board to understand why I'm terminating both the engagement and the merger before the news breaks publicly. Donovan Burke's expression hardened into the skeptical evaluation of someone who'd survived 3 market crashes. This puts us in an extremely difficult position. We've committed significant resources to integration planning. Our stock price has risen 23% in anticipation of the merger benefits. Backing out now will raise serious questions about our due diligence and leadership judgment. Richard seized the opening, rising from his corner seat with the commanding presence that had dominated boardrooms for 4 decades. My daughter's personal feelings are clouding her business judgment. Yes, Preston made some questionable financial decisions that should be addressed, but they can be resolved quietly through settlement and restructuring. Walking away from a $200 million deal because she's having second thoughts about marriage is the real scandal here. He pulled out his phone, displaying the security footage Preston had provided. Catherine and Ethan talking by the piano, sitting together in the empty lobby late at night, the intimate quality of their conversations evident even without sound. Let's address the real issue. She's been conducting an inappropriate relationship with a maintenance worker, someone who's compromised her ability to make rational business decisions. This man is Ethan Cross. Richard's voice carried the weight of accusation. 13 years ago, he tried to sue Atlas Performance for injuries sustained during a concert preparation. We settled that claim generously, $75,000. He disappeared after taking the money. Now he's resurfaced, worked his way into my daughter's building, and manipulated her into this situation. She's not ending the merger because of Preston's finances. She's ending it because she's been compromised by a con artist playing on her emotions. That's a lie. Catherine's voice cut through the room sharp as broken glass. Ethan didn't manipulate anyone. He took a maintenance job 3 years ago because he needed health insurance after his wife died of cancer. He had no idea I was connected to Atlas Performance until after he was hired. And the reason he knows that connection exists is because your company destroyed him. She turned to face her father directly, no longer the dutiful daughter, but an adversary with evidence and conviction. Ethan Cross was a concert pianist with a $300,000 contract for a regional tour. Opening night in Cleveland, substandard stage rigging you personally approved to cut costs collapsed during rehearsal. He saved a young musician's life by pushing her out of the way. The equipment crushed his hand, pulverized the bones beyond full repair. 3 surgeries couldn't restore complete function. Your investigation concluded it was cost-cutting gone wrong. You settled with him for $75,000. His medical bills were $68,000. You destroyed a man's career, his livelihood, his dreams, and paid him $7,000 profit for the privilege. Catherine's hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. But that's not even the worst part. Ethan Cross wrote Starlight Vow, the song my first love supposedly composed for me before he died. Daniel Cross started it but couldn't finish. Ethan completed it without taking credit because he loved me from a distance and wanted me to have something beautiful, even if I never knew it came from him. That was 16 years ago, long before he had any idea who I'd become or what I'd inherit. The room had gone utterly silent. Even Richard seemed momentarily thrown by the revelation, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. Eleanor Whitmore removed her reading glasses, studying Catherine with new intensity. And 13 years ago, your cost-cutting at Atlas Performance destroyed his career. We paid him $75,000 to cover $68,000 in medical bills for a $300,000 contract. You ruined his life for a quarterly profit margin. Catherine's voice dropped to something quieter, but no less forceful. So yes, I care about him, but that has nothing to do with Preston being a criminal. This board can choose to support me in protecting Sterling Capital from fraud, or you can side with my father in prioritizing profit over ethics. But I will not marry a thief to maintain appearances, and I will not stand silent while we pretend this company's foundation isn't built on the bodies of people we crushed. Eleanor spoke first, her Boston accent more pronounced than usual. Catherine, I appreciate your honesty and your moral clarity, but your father raises a valid concern about perception and timing. Setting aside the emotional aspects, how do we know your relationship with Mr. Cross isn't influencing this decision? That you're not seeing conspiracies where there are merely irregularities? Because I'm bringing you evidence, not feelings. Catherine pulled up the forensic reports, the shell company structures, the gambling debts Preston had accumulated in Las Vegas casinos, $8 million that explain the desperation driving his fraud. If I were acting on emotion, I'd have quietly called off the wedding and buried Preston's crimes to avoid scandal. Instead, I'm exposing everything and accepting whatever consequences follow, because integrity matters more than convenience. Donovan Burke leaned back, fingers steepled. The board needs to deliberate privately before making any decision of this magnitude. We'll vote on whether to support your termination of the Ashford merger and whether enhanced oversight of your position is warranted given the circumstances. Understood. I accept whatever terms you require. Catherine gathered her materials. But I want this board to know, if you vote against me, I'll resign and take this evidence to the SEC anyway. Sterling Capital deserves better than to be complicit in fraud, regardless of who runs it. She left them to their deliberations and returned to her office, where Rebecca waited with coffee Catherine couldn't drink and updates she could barely process. The next 30 minutes stretched like hours, each second weighted with the knowledge that her entire career hung in the balance. When the call came to return, Catherine walked into that conference room, prepared to lose everything she'd built. Eleanor delivered the verdict, her expression unreadable. The board has voted 6-6, a tie. Catherine felt her stomach drop. Under our corporate bylaws, as CEO, you hold the deciding vote in the event of a tie. However, if you exercise that vote to support your own position, we're requiring significant consequences to demonstrate accountability. What consequences? Enhanced financial oversight for 18 months, monthly audits by outside consultants, complete transparency about your relationship with Mr. Cross to ensure no conflicts of interest, and personal liability provisions. If Sterling Capital's stock price drops more than 30% as a result of this decision, you'll cover losses from your personal assets up to $5 million. Catherine met Eleanor's eyes and saw not hostility but a kind of respect, the acknowledgement that real leadership meant accepting accountability. I accept all terms without reservation. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against expensive flooring. This is a catastrophic mistake. When the stock craters and investors flee, don't come begging for help fixing what you destroyed. He stalked out, followed by 2 board members who'd voted against her, old allies of his, men who'd served under him for decades. The door closed behind them with a finality that felt like severance, like the last tie to her father's world snapping cleanly. The remaining board members filed out more slowly, some offering quiet words of support, others maintaining professional distance. Eleanor paused at the door, her hand resting briefly on Catherine's shoulder. You did the right thing. That doesn't mean it won't hurt. The pain came quickly and comprehensively. Within 48 hours, Sterling Capital stock plummeted 28%, just shy of the threshold that would trigger Catherine's personal liability, but devastating nonetheless. The financial press had a field day with headlines that ranged from sympathetic to savage. Ice Queen melts for janitor. Sterling CEO chooses love over profits. Romantic idealism tanks major merger. Catherine had to sell her penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. $4.2 million of prime real estate she'd purchased as a symbol of having made it. She sold her vacation cabin in Wisconsin, her investment portfolio, everything liquid she could convert to cash to cover the company's immediate liquidity needs and demonstrate her commitment to accountability. She moved into a modest two-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood where young professionals and families lived normal lives without drivers or housekeepers or the trappings of wealth she'd taken for granted. Preston was arrested by the FBI 2 weeks after the board meeting. Turned out they'd been investigating Ashford Investment Partners for months, waiting for enough evidence to move. Catherine's forensic reports gave them everything they needed. The perp walk made national news. Preston in handcuffs, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking to reveal the desperate gambler underneath. Richard gave interviews to the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, painting his daughter as emotionally unstable, a cautionary tale about what happened when sentiment overruled sense. Chicago's business community largely shunned her. Country club membership quietly revoked. Invitations to galas and fundraisers suddenly stopped arriving. The social machinery of the elite closing ranks against the woman who'd broken their unspoken rules. But something unexpected happened over the following months. Sterling Capital, stripped of its toxic merger and forced into radical transparency by the board's oversight requirements, began to transform. Catherine implemented ethics committees with actual employee representation, created whistleblower protections with teeth, commissioned independent safety audits of every property and subsidiary the company owned. She personally reviewed compensation for every wrongful termination in the past decade, cutting checks to people her father had crushed and discarded. The work was exhausting and expensive and necessary. The company that emerged was leaner, its profit margins thinner, but its reputation started shifting. ESG funds, environmental, social, and governance-focused investors tired of corporate malfeasance, began taking positions in Sterling Capital. 6 months after the crisis, the stock had recovered to 85% of its pre-collapse value. Not a complete restoration, but enough to prove the model could work. Catherine's personal life transformed even more dramatically. She learned to cook, pulling recipes from websites, and burning more meals than she successfully completed in the first month. She did her own laundry, discovered that grocery shopping could be oddly meditative, found herself striking up conversations with neighbors in the elevator of her Lincoln Park building. Normal people with normal jobs who didn't care that she was a CEO, who just wanted to know if she'd seen the new coffee shop that opened on the corner. Ethan was careful with her, letting the relationship develop slowly without rushing toward definitions or commitments. They met in the evenings after the building emptied, sitting by the piano or walking through Millennium Park when the weather permitted. He told her about Natalie, the high school sweetheart who'd seen past his damaged hands, who'd worked double shifts at Northwestern Memorial while he recovered from his third surgery, who never once made him feel less than whole. Lily has her smile, gets the same little crinkle by her eyes when she laughs. Sometimes I look at our daughter and it's like Natalie never left, like she's still here in every gesture and expression and moment of joy. Catherine learned about Lily's birth during a blizzard, Ethan delivering his own daughter in their Detroit bathroom because the ambulance couldn't reach them in time. About Natalie's diagnosis 2 years later, stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. About the medical debt that buried them despite insurance, the bankruptcy that followed, the desperate scramble for any work that offered benefits. She was in so much pain at the end, but she wouldn't take the morphine because she wanted to be lucid for Lily, wanted to read bedtime stories and help with homework, and pretend everything was normal for as long as possible. Ethan's voice went quiet, remembering. The last thing she said to me was, "Take care of our girl," like I needed to be told, like there was anything I wouldn't do for Lily. In return, Catherine offered pieces of herself she'd locked away for decades. Her mother's death when she was 12, the aneurysm that took her without warning, leaving Catherine alone with a father who transformed grief into tyranny. He never hit me, never had to, just had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you'd disappointed him at a cellular level. After Daniel died, I threw myself into business school, got my MBA at 23, joined Sterling Capital at 24. Richard said grief was weakness, and I believed him. Thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, maybe I'd earn the love he withheld. Took me until my 30s to realize he wasn't capable of it. Ethan's observation came gentle but clear. You spent 16 years in love with someone who didn't know you existed. I spent 16 years, frozen at 18, mourning someone who didn't write the song I thought defined our relationship. We're both pretty good at sad, but we get to write the ending now. The complications came not from their relationship, but from Lily, who took to Catherine with a 7-year-old's lack of filter and abundance of directness. Catherine had arranged for the girl to attend Sterling Towers employee daycare, a benefit most maintenance staff couldn't afford, but Catherine had quietly restructured the subsidy formula to make it accessible to everyone regardless of position or salary. Lily showed up at Catherine's office unannounced one afternoon, clutching drawings she'd made in daycare, stick figures that were clearly meant to be her father, herself, and a tall woman with yellow hair. "Are you my daddy's friend?" Catherine, who'd been reviewing acquisition documents, looked up to find the child studying her with unsettling intensity. "I think so. I hope so." "Good, because he needs more friends. He's always alone, except for me." Lily spoke with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children who'd seen too much too young. "Mommy used to say he needed people, but after she died, he stopped talking to everyone. Just works and takes care of me and plays piano when he thinks I'm asleep." The observation pierced Catherine's chest with its accuracy. "Your dad loves you very much. I know, but sometimes I worry about what happens when I'm grown up. Who will take care of him when I'm not there?" Lily's brown eyes, so like her mother's according to Ethan, held genuine concern that seemed too heavy for someone so small. "He's sad a lot, tries to hide it, but I can tell." "What makes you think he's sad?" "The music. When he plays piano late at night at the community center, it sounds different than when he plays for me. Heavier, like he's trying to tell someone something, but doesn't have the words." Lily climbed into the chair across from Catherine's desk with the unself-conscious ease of a child who didn't understand professional boundaries. "But after you came to the Christmas party, and after we came back from our trip, his music sounded lighter. Like maybe he found the words finally." The girl's perception was devastating in its accuracy. Catherine felt exposed, as if a 7-year-old had seen through 16 years of carefully constructed defenses to the lonely woman beneath who'd forgotten how to let anyone close. "I'm glad the music sounds lighter." "Me too." Lily grinned, revealing a gap where she'd lost a tooth the week before. "Are you going to marry my daddy?" Catherine choked on nothing. "What?" "That's what happens in stories. The princess meets the prince, they fall in love, they get married. You're kind of like a princess, except with a building instead of a castle. And daddy's like a prince who got cursed, but is secretly good at music. I don't think real life works like stories, sweetheart." "Why not?" Lily's logic was irrefutable in its simplicity. Stories are just things that happen to people, and you're people. So why can't you have a story? Ethan arrived then, apologetic and slightly frazzled from having discovered his daughter missing from daycare. The conversation ended, but the question lingered in Catherine's mind for days afterward, echoing in quiet moments when she found herself wondering what a life with Ethan and Lily might actually look like. In April, Dr. Lawrence Kent visited with news that changed everything. There's a new microsurgical technique being pioneered at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. nerve reconstruction for old crush injuries. They've had promising results with patients who were told their damage was permanent. Ethan sat in Catherine's office. Their evening conversations had become routine, accepted by employees who'd learned their CEO's personal life was off limits for gossip, and shook his head. "I've made peace with what I lost, Dr. Kent. I don't need to get it back." "But what if you could?" Catherine leaned forward, unable to suppress the hope rising in her chest. "Not all of it, but enough to perform again. Enough to show Lily what you were before the accident, what you could have been. I show her every day through how I live, how I treat people, how I never let bitterness poison what's good. That's more valuable than perfect technique." Dr. Kent pulled out research papers, spreading them across the desk. "The surgery's experimental but covered under Sterling Capital's Enhanced Health Plan as innovative treatment. Recovery would be 4 to 6 months. Success rate is around 60% for meaningful improvement, not full restoration, but significant functional gain." Lily, who'd been coloring at the small table Catherine kept in her office for the girls' visits, looked up at her father with eyes too wise for 7 years. "I want to hear you play the way Grandma's videos show, before the accident, when your hands could do anything." Ethan's resistance crumbled under his daughter's earnest gaze. "If I try this and it fails, if my hand ends up worse than it is now, then we'll deal with it together." Catherine's certainty was absolute, unshakable. "But if you don't try, you'll always wonder. And I think Lily deserves to see her father at least attempt to reclaim what was stolen from him." The surgery happened in July at Johns Hopkins. 8 hours of microsurgical reconstruction that left Ethan unconscious for a day and in significant pain for weeks after. Catherine took a leave of absence from the office, the first she'd taken in a decade, to be there. She fielded board calls from the hospital waiting room while Lily colored pictures to hang in her father's recovery room, creating a gallery of stick figure families and rainbow-colored hope. Dr. Kent consulted on the procedure, his professional pride invested in proving the technique's viability. When the head surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion evident in every line of his face, his cautious optimism felt like a gift. "We rebuilt the neural connections and repaired scar tissue that was impeding function. Now it's up to time and physical therapy. Give it 6 months before we assess final results." The recovery was brutal in ways Catherine hadn't anticipated. 5 hours daily of physical therapy, exercises that left Ethan sweating and swearing and questioning why he'd agreed to this torture. She witnessed his frustration during evening visits, the way he'd stare at his hand like it belonged to a stranger, willing it to bend in ways it had forgotten. Lily practiced piano in his presence, small fingers working through scales and simple melodies with determination inherited from both parents. Sometimes Ethan would reach out with his damaged hand, trying to mirror her movements, failing more often than succeeding. But gradually, incrementally, function returned. By September, he could play simple pieces again, children's songs that made Lily laugh, basic exercises that would have bored him before, but now felt like miracles. By October, he was performing intermediate compositions with only occasional cramping, his technique adapted to accommodate permanent limitations. The hand would never be perfect, would never have the complete fluidity it once possessed. But it was functional enough to teach, to demonstrate, to create music that mattered in ways that had nothing to do with technical perfection. In November, Dr. Kent proposed something audacious. "There's a benefit concert for the music scholarship program we've established in Daniel Cross and Ethan Cross's names. December 22nd. I think you should perform." Ethan's immediate reaction was terror laid bare. "I'm not ready. What if I fail publicly? What if my hand cramps mid-performance and everyone sees exactly how broken I still am? You're always telling me it's okay to make mistakes when I practice." Lily's logic cut through his fear with the precision of a child who didn't understand why adults complicated simple truths. "Why is it different for you?" Catherine added her voice to the chorus. You taught me that being brave means doing what's right, even when you're scared. Now let me teach you that it's okay to try and fall short. The courage is in the attempt, not the perfection. Ethan agreed, though his anxiety built with each passing week as the performance date approached. They scheduled 3 pieces: Starlight Vow, a Chopin nocturne he'd loved before the accident, and something new he'd been composing in stolen hours between teaching and therapy. He called it Second Movement, explaining to Catherine late one night that every great piece of music had more than one part, and their story was just beginning. The Sterling Tower Ballroom filled to capacity on December 22nd. 500 guests, donors, media representatives, students from the scholarship program wearing their best clothes and carrying nervous energy that hummed through the space like electricity. The event had attracted attention beyond their expectations. The story of the janitor turned composer, the CEO who chose integrity over profit, the romance that nearly destroyed an empire but rebuilt it stronger, capturing public imagination in ways none of them had anticipated. Backstage, Ethan paced in his black suit, the first time Catherine had seen him in formal wear outside her fantasies, and the reality somehow exceeded imagination. Lily sat beside Catherine's chair, resplendent in a deep blue dress she'd picked herself, swinging her legs and humming. Daddy looks scared. Is he going to be okay? He's going to be brave. That's different from okay, but sometimes it's better. When the lights dimmed and the audience quieted, Ethan walked onto the stage with Lily's hand in his. The applause was immediate and thunderous, a wall of sound that seemed to physically push against them. He settled at the grand piano while Lily perched on a small bench beside him, exactly as they'd practiced in Catherine's office during stolen evening hours. Ethan's fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of Starlight Vow filled the ballroom with crystalline clarity. This was the piece that had started everything. The song he'd written for an 18-year-old girl he loved from afar, completed what a dying boy had started, given away without claiming credit, because that's what you did when you loved someone from the shadows. Midway through, his hand cramped. Catherine saw him wince, fingers stuttering over keys in a way the audience probably didn't notice, but she knew intimately. Lily reached over and touched his shoulder. Just light pressure, solidarity without words. Ethan pushed through, compensating with his left hand, simplifying passages his right couldn't handle anymore, transforming technical limitations into emotional interpretation that somehow made the piece more powerful than perfection ever could have. The final notes hung in the air like prayers offered to a merciful universe. The audience erupted in standing ovation that went on so long Catherine feared they'd never let him continue, never release him from this moment of triumph and vulnerability combined. But Ethan raised his hand for silence and spoke into the microphone for the first time. This final piece is new. I call it Second Movement because every great piece of music has more than one part. And this, all of this, is just our beginning. It's about second chances, about broken things made beautiful, about love that waits patiently until it's called into the light. He began to play, and Catherine understood why he'd kept the composition secret until now. The melody built from Starlight Vow's themes, but transformed them completely. Where the original spoke of yearning and distance, this new piece spoke of connection and courage. Where the original was lonely, this was communal. Where the original grieved, this celebrated. Lily joined him for the final phrases, her small hands picking out a simple counter melody he'd taught her. Father and daughter creating something together, imperfect and honest and achingly human in ways that no technically flawless performance could match. When the music ended, Ethan stood with Lily in his arms and found Catherine in the crowd. She made her way to the stage through applause that felt less like appreciation and more like witness to something sacred. 3 people who'd chosen each other against every reasonable objection, who'd built a family from grief and second chances and impossible love. The photographer captured the moment, not CEO and employee, not rich woman and poor man, but three people holding hands on a stage while the world watched them choose courage over safety, truth over convenience, love over every carefully calculated reason to stay frozen and afraid. The most beautiful music doesn't come from perfect execution, but from broken people brave enough to play anyway. Dr. Kent watched from the audience, tears streaming down his weathered face. He taught thousands of students over 4 decades, watched brilliance bloom and wither, seen careers flourish and fail. But this, watching a damaged man reclaim his voice through love, watching a frozen woman thaw through courage, watching a child bridge the gap between what was lost and what could still be built. This was the masterpiece. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon when cherry blossoms drifted through Millennium Park like pink snow, Catherine and Ethan sat on a bench watching Lily chase butterflies through spring grass. The girl had grown taller, more confident, her music teacher reporting she had genuine talent if she wanted to pursue it. But more importantly, she was happy, laughing easily, making friends, sometimes talking about her mommy Natalie with fond remembrance instead of desperate grief. The song has an ending now, but it feels unfinished somehow, like it's still being written. Catherine leaned into Ethan's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best promises aren't the ones we make once and lock away. Maybe they're the ones we keep remaking every day in 1,000 small ways. Then make me a promise. Not forever, not some grand declaration. Just promise me today that you'll keep playing, that you'll keep teaching Lily, that you'll keep showing me what it means to love something even when it's hard. I promise. And he meant it with every fiber of his reconstructed being. A young pianist by Crown Fountain was playing for spare change, maybe 19 years old, attacking the keys with more enthusiasm than polish. But there was something pure in his effort, something that reminded Ethan of who he used to be. A scholarship kid washing dishes and dreaming of stages he'd never thought he'd reach. When the boy finished nervously, expecting criticism from passers-by, Ethan stood and applauded. That was beautiful. Keep playing even when it's hard. Even when people tell you you're not good enough. Even when your hands hurt and your heart is breaking. Keep playing because the world needs your music, even if you think no one's listening. The young musician's face lit up with gratitude and relief, and he launched into another piece with newfound confidence. Ethan, Catherine, and Lily sat on the fountain's edge to listen. An unlikely family bound by love that had waited 16 years to be claimed, forged from loss and second chances, and the courage to believe that broken things could still create beauty. Above them, cherry blossoms fell like grace. In the distance, someone laughed. The city hummed its eternal symphony of car horns and distant sirens and wind through new leaves. But here, in this pocket of spring afternoon, with music washing over them, and Lily's hand in his, and Catherine's head on his shoulder, Ethan felt the kind of peace that only came from complete honesty. No secrets, no shadows, no ghosts standing between them. The ending is still being written, by all of us, together. The most beautiful songs aren't the perfect ones, but the ones we write together, with all our mistakes, all our courage, all the love we can possibly give.